Walk into a British yacht club and say Catalina 30. Laughter follows. They call it a Clorox bottle because the received wisdom here is that American boats are floating toys built for sun and cocktails, not storms and survival. Yet more than 6,400 Catalina 30s are still afloat, outnumbering the British legends they mock. What if the world's most ridiculed, mass-produced American cruisers were not just cheap, but smarter by design? And what does it say that modern Europe adopted everything the old guard once scorned? This is where the snobbery collides with the stats, and the truth behind the culture war begins. Frank Butler's Catalina 30 didn't just fill up American marinas. It changed what people expected from a 30-foot sailboat. Step below, and the difference is immediate. Where older boats forced you to crouch, the Catalina offers 6 feet of standing headroom. The beam stretches to nearly 11 feet, 10 feet 10 inches, giving it the footprint of a much larger boat. A family of 4 can move around without stepping on each other's toes. There is a full-size saloon, a real galley, and a table big enough for dinner or a rainy day card game. That volume isn't just for show. In the Chesapeake, on the Great Lakes, or cruising the Florida Keys, the Catalina 30 became the go-to platform for weekenders and summer cruisers who wanted to bring their kids, their friends, and sometimes even their dog. Early reviews called it the floating family room. Owners talk about the first time they realized they could stand upright to pull on a sweater or sleep on a real double berth instead of a pipe cot. Production numbers tell the story. Over 6,400 Catalina 30s were built since 1974. That is more than most entire British brands, and it is not just because they were cheap. The boats were designed for real people with real families, not just for diehards braving the North Sea. The wide beam and modest fin or shoal draft keel opened up shallow anchorages and quiet coves. Charter fleets snapped them up for their ability to fit 2 couples in comfort. The grid and liner construction with its molded fiberglass pan kept costs down and allowed for a consistent, stiff structure that could be churned out in volume. Surveyors still pass hulls from the 70s, and owner forums are full of stories about boats that have cruised for decades with only routine repairs. For many Americans, the Catalina 30 was less a yacht and more a floating cabin, a place to relax, sleep in, and watch the sunset with the kids asleep below. The priorities were clear: space, comfort, and the freedom to explore, not survival in a gale. That philosophy, baked into every hull, would soon ripple across the Atlantic and change the definition of a cruising boat. In the Solent and the Channel, the sea sets the rules. Cold water, fast tides, and sudden squalls shape every decision. Boats that last here are built for survival, not show. The Contessa 32, drawn by David Sadler in 1970, is a direct answer to these demands. With a beam under 10 feet and nearly half its weight in ballast, the Contessa stands up when others falter. Owners describe how, in rough weather, the boat finds its rhythm, slicing upwind, steady through chop, never feeling frantic. During the 1979 Fastnet race, a Force 10 storm capsized or destroyed dozens of modern yachts. Several Contessa 32s survived, battered but upright. One survivor said the boat looked after herself when everything else failed. Step inside, and the contrast with American designs is immediate. The Contessa cabin is narrow, with low sea berths and handholds everywhere. There is just enough space to sit at the table, and the galley is made for bracing yourself, not entertaining. British club sailors accept the gloom. It is a cave, but it is a safe cave, one owner says. You can cook at 35 degrees of heel, and you will never be thrown across the saloon. The cockpit is small, deep, and protected by high coamings, built for keeping the sea out when the deck floods. Comfort at anchor is secondary. What matters is safety when the channel turns hostile. The Westerly Centaur, launched in 1969, takes a different route to the same goal. With twin bilge keels and a skeg-hung rudder, it can stand upright in drying harbors, ready for the next tide. Over 2,500 Centaurs were built, reflecting the need for boats that can handle British waters, steep chop, muddy creeks, and the reality that grounding is inevitable. The Centaur cockpit is deep and secure. Its interior compact but practical. It is not about maximizing space, but about always having a handhold, always a place to brace when the boat lurches. For British sailors, these boats are more than transport. High ballast ratios, deep keels, and narrow beams are answers to a coastline that punishes mistakes. The stories told are not about sunsets, but about making it through the night when the wind turns against you. The comfort comes from knowing the boat will take care of you, no matter how dark or cramped the cabin. Every coastline writes its own rules. In the Solent, the water moves with a force that surprises newcomers. Tides can rip along at 4 knots, shifting twice a day, piling against sandbanks and shoals. When the wind blows against the current, the surface turns into a mess of short, steep waves, chop that can stop a boat dead or slam it so hard the hull shudders. Depths in the channel drop off quickly, but inside the Solent, the seabed is a patchwork of banks and holes, demanding careful navigation and a boat that can punch through confusion without losing its head. The weather is never far from turning. Gales sweep in off the Atlantic, and the water stays cold even in July. For a sailor, every mile is a test of judgment and a test of design. On the other side of the Atlantic, the Chesapeake tells a different story. Here, the average depth is less than 30 feet, and much of the water is even shallower. Shoals and shifting sandbars stretch for miles, and the risk is not being swamped by a breaking sea, it is running aground on a bar you did not see coming. Summer brings long stretches of gentle wind, and the water warms up fast. In Florida and the Bahamas, the sea turns turquoise over banks just a few feet deep. Cruisers look for anchorages tucked behind islands, slipping over sand that would stop a deep keelboat in its tracks. Light breezes, warm nights, and the freedom to explore shallow coves shape what kind of boat makes sense. These are not just different sailing grounds, they are different worlds. The British sailor expects to fight the sea every trip, so their boats are narrow, deep, and heavy, designed to claw to windward through chop and ride out storms. The American sailor needs a boat that can float in 4 feet of water and stay upright in a summer squall, with enough width to keep the family comfortable when the wind is light. Geography does not just influence the design, it demands it. The shape of the water decides the shape of the hull. Stability is not just a feeling, it is a measurable force, and it is where the British and American philosophies part ways most dramatically. Naval architects talk about 2 kinds of stability: form stability and ballast stability. The numbers behind them tell a story that is far more nuanced than clubroom jokes about Tupperware. Take a beamy American cruiser like the Catalina 30. Its wide hull means that when the boat heels even a little, say 5 or 10 degrees, the shape itself pushes back hard. This is form stability. The righting arm, called GZ, rises quickly at low angles, so the boat feels stiff and resists heeling in the first place. That is why, on Chesapeake afternoons or in the Bahamas, families can set a drink on the table and expect it to stay put. Most of the time, sailing happens between 0 and 30 degrees of heel, right in the sweet spot of form stability. The Catalina 30 GZ curve climbs steeply at first, then peaks around 25 or 30 degrees, before tapering off. Now picture a narrow, deep-keeled British classic like the Contessa 32. Here, the hull heels easily at first. There is less pushback from the shape, so the boat feels tender in a gust. But as the angle increases, the deep ballast comes into play. The righting arm keeps growing, and the boat keeps fighting to come upright well past 60 or 70 degrees. The GZ curve is gentler at the start, but stays positive out to a much higher angle, often beyond 130 degrees. This is ballast stability. It is what keeps a Contessa coming back from a knockdown in the channel, even when a wave rolls it nearly upside down. What does this mean in practice? The Catalina 30 angle of vanishing stability, where it will not right itself, is typically just over 100 degrees. The Contessa 32, by contrast, can reach a vanishing angle around 130 to 140 degrees. Neither is inherently unsafe, both are self-righting, but they are optimized for different realities. The American boat is built for flat sailing and comfort in moderate conditions, with most of its righting power where it is actually used. The British boat gives up some comfort early on for the assurance that if the worst happens, it will fight to recover from even the most extreme knockdown. It is not about one being better than the other, it is about what each sailor expects from the sea and what trade-offs they are willing to live with. In the factory, the difference between American and British boats starts with how the hull is built up from raw fiberglass. On the American side, production lines in California and Florida turned out hulls by the thousands using a molded grid or liner system. This means a full fiberglass skeleton, complete with floors, bunks, and supports, gets dropped into the hull as a single piece, then glued and glassed in place. The approach slashes labor hours. Instead of teams of laminators and carpenters working boat by boat, the same internal structure pops out of a mold and fits every hull perfectly. It is fast, repeatable, and cheap. One reason why a Catalina 30 could be sold for a fraction of the price of a hand-built classic. British builders, by contrast, stuck with hand-laid glass and tabbed construction. Bulkheads and furniture are cut from marine plywood, then glassed directly to the inside of the hull, one at a time. Each tab, made of layers of fiberglass mat and resin, locks the piece to the hull and creates a continuous, visible joint. Floors and stringers are laminated in by hand, following the curve of the hull. It is slow, messy, and skilled work, with every boat a little different from the last. But it means a surveyor can see every joint and repair a damaged section without tearing out the whole interior. The American grid system creates a hull that is impressively stiff for its weight and cost. The downside arrives if the grid ever breaks free after a hard grounding, for example. Repairs can mean cutting out large chunks of the interior to reach the bond, a job that quickly grows expensive. On a British hand-laid boat, a cracked tab or a rotten bulkhead is usually a local fix. It is dirty and time-consuming, but rarely fatal to the boat's value. Both systems have kept boats afloat for decades, but they reflect different priorities: speed and economy on one side, transparency and repairability on the other. In the yard, the truth about repair and longevity comes out not in theory, but in invoices and phone calls. Ask any boatyard manager who has seen both types, American grid boats and British hand-laid classics, and the answer is always practical. When a Catalina 30 or Hunter comes in after a hard grounding, the big worry is the grid. If that molded fiberglass skeleton has broken free from the hull, the fix is not just a patch. It means cutting out parts of the interior, grinding back the liner, and rebonding the structure, sometimes for weeks. On an older boat, the labor alone can run into 5 figures, often more than the boat is worth. Insurers have gotten wise. A serious grid delamination is one of the few things that can turn a cheap production cruiser into a write-off overnight. Hand-laid British boats like the Contessa or Westerly face their own issues, but the pattern is different. Most common failures are local: a cracked tab where a bulkhead meets the hull, maybe some rotten plywood from a leaky chain plate. The repair is messy but straightforward. Grind out the old tabbing, epoxy in new glass, replace the wood. A skilled laminator can have it sorted in a week, and the bill, while not cheap, rarely totals the boat. The structure is visible, the damage is obvious, and the fix is contained. But here is the catch. Catastrophic grid failures are rare. Thousands of grid-built Catalinas and Hunters from the 1970s are still afloat, their skeletons intact. Surveyors see far more routine issues, like keel stub cracks, chain plate leaks, and minor flecks, than full-blown grid debonds. For most owners, the real cost over time is not about catastrophic repairs, but about maintenance, upgrades, and the occasional fight with moisture. The risk with a grid boat is low, but when it goes wrong, it goes very wrong. With a tabbed boat, the risk is steady: more labor, more woodwork, but fewer surprises. For the average sailor, the numbers favor the grid as long as you stay within the design envelope. Push either boat outside its comfort zone, and the yard manager's phone starts ringing. Cockpit design is where the philosophies of British and American boats become unmistakable. On a classic British cruiser like the Contessa 32, the cockpit is a narrow, deep well, ringed by high coamings that rise almost to waist height. The footwell is small, just wide enough for 2 pairs of sea boots, and the benches are short and set low. Every surface is within arm's reach, making it easy to brace yourself during a sudden heel or when a wave comes over the rail. The companionway is tucked forward, protected by a bridge deck to keep water out of the cabin. This setup is not about lounging, it is about survival when the deck is awash and the wind howls down the channel. American designs like the Catalina 30 take a different approach. The cockpit stretches wide across the stern, with long benches that invite you to stretch out in the sun. Coamings are lower, often just enough to keep you from sliding off the seat, and the footwell is broad. Later models add walk-through transoms for easy boarding from a dinghy or the dock. The effect is less like a foxhole and more like a patio. There is space for a group to gather, eat, or just watch the sunset, comfort that extends the living space beyond the cabin. These choices are not just about aesthetics, they define how sailors use their boats and what risks they are willing to accept for a better life afloat. By the late 1990s, the lines that once divided British and American cruising boats began to blur in European boatyards. Benetton's Oceanis series, first launched in 1986, set a new template with hulls that carried their beam all the way aft, wide cockpits and light-filled interiors. Jeannot soon followed, and Hansei in Germany pushed the formula even further, with twin wheels, open transoms, and cabins that felt more like modern apartments than storm shelters. Where once a narrow stern and heavy ballast were signs of serious intent, the new generation of cruisers wore their volume proudly. The numbers tell the story. A boat like the Benetton Oceanis 38 is nearly as beamy as a design from the 1970s, but with even more space aft for cabins and storage. Designers openly admitted they were responding to customer demand for comfort, not just survival. Charter fleets snapped up these boats for their ability to host families in style, and private buyers embraced the idea of a yacht as a floating home. The same features British sailors once mocked, wide sterns, big windows, and sprawling cockpits, became the new standard across Europe. The market had voted, and the old debate over comfort versus toughness was quietly decided every time another beamy cruiser rolled off the production line. Today, the world's top-selling cruising sailboats look more American than ever, wide, light, and built for comfort. As production lines from Europe to Asia chase that formula, the old debate fades into irrelevance. The truth is, most sailors choose sunsets over storms. In the end, the horizon belongs to those who design for the way we actually sail, not just for how we survive. What do you think? Did comfort win for the right reasons?